big banks, not for Canadians.
Hear, hear.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Vancouver East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be splitting my time with the member for South Okanagan West Kootenay. First, let me also acknowledge and thank my colleague, the member from Saskatoon West, for the incredible work that she has been doing based on her history and her background, the advocacy that she brings to the table, the recent approach that she takes to housing, but with heart and compassion, and always pushing the government to do the right thing, and I thank her for all of her efforts. Because why, Mr. Speaker? Housing is one of the most important issues from coast to coast to coast. We're talking about affordable housing, housing where people can access as a home that they can afford, a place where they feel safe, where they can thrive. And the truth of the matter is, we haven't had that for a very long time for far too many Canadians. I can tell you this, in 1993, the Liberal government, the federal Liberal government, cancelled the National Affordable Housing Program. And as a result of that, Mr. Speaker, this country lost more than 500,000 units of affordable housing that would otherwise have been built by the nonprofit or the cooperative sector. Just imagine for 1 minute what our communities would look like across this country in this housing crisis if we had had an additional 500,000 units of affordable housing in our community. We don't have that because of that approach, that cancellation of the National Affordable Housing Program by the federal Liberal government. Since that time, what's happened? The Conservatives, of course, took power. And what did they do about the affordable housing crisis? Nothing. And so the issue continues. And more we see people in our communities today in desperate need. I see this every day in Vancouver East, and it breaks my heart, Mr. Speaker. I walk the streets of my community, and there's an area, the downtown east side. I literally have to step over people on the sidewalk. Why? Because they are homeless. They don't have a place that they can call a home. And somehow we think it's okay. Somehow the government can brag about how swell they are with their national strategy that they say that they have brought back. And they pat themselves on the back and say, yay, we're so great. And then we learn, what have they done? They double count the numbers. Now, I'm not saying that the government shouldn't be investing in subsidies. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be renewing the agreements for the co-ops. Of course they should. They should have been doing that all along. They never should have canceled the National Affordable Housing Program. The Conservatives should have done that job 10 years ago. Those nonprofit sectors and the co-op should not have been left to the late date for someone to come to support them. And subsidies was needed all the way through, not just now, but all the way through. So many of the nonprofit housing projects and the co-op housing units had to raise their rent all through these years. Why? Because they didn't get subsidies from the government. And so when the government says, but we are doing our job, everything is going to be great, well, just talk to the people who are on the streets today. Ask them how great it is. When you see people in the community, if I have seen, where people are vying for awning space so that they can stay out of the rain because they're homeless, they're fighting over that. There is something very wrong with this picture. And none of us, not one of us, should be patting ourselves on the back to say that we've done a great job. Far from it. And you know what? Rhetorical advantage, really? That's how you double count to make it sound good? That appears to be the Liberals' approach to pretty well everything. Just sound good, look good in front of the media. It doesn't really matter what is really happening on the ground. Rhetorical advantage by the parliamentary secretary's own admission. That's what they're doing. Counting and double counting so that they can sound good. My goodness, that is the approach to addressing the affordable housing crisis. The parliamentary secretary, I may add, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Social Development admitted this week, and it was reported in the Toronto Star. Now, I have to say, he also admitted when he appeared in the Standing Committee for Citizenship and Immigration on July 24, 2018, when he agreed with my assessment of the colossal mistakes made by the Liberal government of the 1990s. Let me just quote him on the record. He said, "I agree with the member from BC. The mistakes that were made in the early 1990s devastated people in this country and created a national housing crisis. The policies over the last 10 years made it worse." That's a direct quote from the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Social Development at committee, admitting that they created the national housing crisis, exacerbated by the Conservatives because of their lack of action over the last 10 years. And what's happened? Let's just take a moment for a minute and look at the reality of what people are faced with. Only 10% of housing construction has been for rental units. A crisis-level shortage of rental units has led to skyrocketing rental costs. And while working-class and middle-class wages, frankly, stagnated. In Vancouver East, in my own community in Vancouver, our rental vacancy rate is at 1%. In some areas, it's at 0%. Imagine an average cost for a one-bedroom apartment in Vancouver is $2,100. In Vancouver, some 50% of people in the community spend more, far more than 30% of their total income on accessing safe, secure, affordable housing. Housing, frankly, is out of reach for people. And I'm not talking about French villas or anything like that. I'm just talking about a roof over their heads, a place that they can call home, a place that is safe, Mr. Speaker. And in the downtown East Side community, we have some of the worst housing conditions. Some people compare it to third world housing conditions. These are the SROs, single room occupancy hotel rooms, 100 square feet, cockroach-infested bed bugs, some with no heat, no cooking facilities, no toilets or bathrooms, unsafe conditions. And yet those rooms are some of the highest costs on a per square footage basis, to which the lowest income, the most vulnerable people rent. That is our reality, and even that housing stock is dwindling, Mr. Speaker. And so while the Liberals can sit back and say, hey, we're doing great, and we will flow 90% of the money after the next election to build new housing, I ask them to just take a minute and think about the realities of today and what that means for the people who need that housing now, Mr. Speaker. I just had a constituent who came and asked for help, and she lives in a home, and is full of mold. And her doctors have said it's not safe for her, it's not safe for her son. But she has no ability to find alternative affordable housing. My colleague, the member from Timmins Bay, have been raising this issue for many of the people in the Aboriginal community, Indigenous community, the Métis community. And what has the government done about that? Like as though it's all going to be okay because the money's going to flow after the next election. In the meantime, people's health are at risk and they're in danger. That's the urgency of what we're talking about. Mr. Speaker, I have spent a night on the street, one night, with dusk to dawn, with them, with young people. And I tell you, that one night, I didn't even know how I survived. Right after that, I got pneumonia. I was sick for weeks. And yet people live in those conditions because they have no other choice. And that's the reality of our housing crisis. And even young professionals are having a tough time to make ends meet and they cannot afford to get affordable housing, live in their own communities, and owning a home is all but a dream for them. So it's time for action. That's why this motion is before us. That's why the NDP is calling on the government in this upcoming budget, invest the real money, flow the money now, build 250,000 units of affordable housing now, and get people off the streets so that we can all do what is needed to do, what we're elected to do, and then get these programs going and make a real difference in every single community in this country.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development.
Having been referenced several times in that speech, let me assure the member opposite that in the early 90s I was damn angry with the politicians on this side of the House who are Liberals for cancelling housing programs. And if they want to go back and look at the CBC archives and see my work as a reporter at City TV and CP24, they will see me castigating every Liberal I can get my hands on, provincially, federally and locally. It was absolutely wrong, and it devastated housing systems in this country and devastated people, more importantly, and that was wrong. But when that party opposite rolled the dice with Stephen Harper and brought down a budget that had $2.7 billion in housing investments that were projected over the last 10 years, when they also killed the Kelowna Accord, the national daycare program, the whole bit, but when they rolled the dice for power instead of delivering services to people, I swore I would never forgive them. And I didn't quit my job as a reporter and go to Disneyland on a vacation. I quit my job as a reporter, became a city councillor to fight bad housing policy that was being produced by all politicians in this country, and that's how I got to city council. And when I decided to run federally, it was to change the policy of the Liberal Party to create a national housing program, and I'm damn proud of it. And what I'm really proud of is that the riding that she represents has received the most investment out of the $5.7 billion of any riding in this country because the needs are greatest in her riding. $17 million has been invested. Virtually every new housing project that has been built in BC in the last 6 months, thanks to a provincial government that gets it and is cooperating and was one of the first to sign the agreement, has been delivered to the City of Vancouver and Victoria to deal exactly with the problem she highlights. What I would just once like to hear from her is thank you.
Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member wants to be acknowledged and want people to bow down and say, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, you know what? That is what we're elected to do the job and then to make sure that we don't cancel programs. He says when he was a reporter, and I was so damn angry at the Liberals, well, where's that anger now? Because what he's advocating for, that he's fine with, is to say we will flow that money after the next election. Like as though time would stand still for the people who need housing right now, this very moment, in the freezing cold, standing outside, Mr. Speaker. And then you know what? To make himself feel better, to make all the Liberal members feel better, what do? Oh, they double count. Why? For rhetorical advantage. All but to make himself feel better? Is that what this is all about? But I'll say this, Mr. Speaker, because it isn't. The people who need the housing, they need it now. Stop patting yourself on the back as though you've done them a huge favor by doing the little...
Question.